girl in her early 20s has always got more power in a nightclub than a guy who is not buying a 10K table. Even a guy who's buying like splashing $10,000 minimum spend on bottles to book a table in a club in Singapore, and now that might be $20,000, $25,000 given inflation. Even then, they might say, "Sir, you've offended this beautiful young woman who has a lot of friends and is beautiful and can bring in even bigger spenders than you." That's what they're not going to say that, but that's what they're thinking. So we're going to have to kick you out in a dispute. Let alone a guy like me who comes from a pickup artist background where we're taught never to spend any money right in the club and instead to get good at gaming the whole system.
Welcome to the Masculine Psychology Podcast, where we answer key questions in relationships, attraction, success, and fulfillment. Now, here's your host, world-renowned therapist and life coach, David Tian.
Welcome to the Masculine Psychology Podcast. I'm David Tian, your host. In this episode, I'm hoping to help you appreciate the positive intent and the value and the worthiness of those parts of you that you might be ashamed of, that you may experience as needy or wanting love or connection or approval or significance, or desperately needing some security or certainty in your life. And in order to compensate for those parts of you that you're ashamed of, that you might perceive as weak, you maybe try to exile them or hide them or cover them up by acting the opposite, acting as if you aren't feeling needy underneath. So what I'm covering here in this episode is a response to feedback from the past few episodes, starting with the Barbie movie analysis. And I'm actually going to be quoting from a couple of comments to that particular episode. And then to some more general feedback on the two-parter republished episode on our uncensored opinion of the Red Pill movement. And this one was with Steve Maeda that we did together. And it's also in response to feedback I've gotten over the years and have even given myself, given other parts of myself feedback that has a similar theme. And I've got to say, I learned a lot about a certain segment of my audience, and it might be you listening, from the comments, the feedback, the emails, and messages on the Barbie movie analysis. So first of all, thank you for sharing your comments and your feedback. That's how I learn. My ideal format would actually be to sit in front of, or over Zoom, another person who has questions, and we get to work through those together. I've tested that format. You might have known about this. There's an episode where I worked with a live caller, so to speak. That was awesome for me, and I think for the other person as well. And I remember gushing to my wife about how great and rewarding this format is. But when I tested it, about a third of the feedback was super positive, and then about 2/3, or maybe a half of the feedback was more tentative, and it was like, "This is really great, David, but try not to do too much of this." And the feeling I got as I asked some more clarifying questions was that it was too slow, and maybe they felt that it wasn't quite as relevant to them because they were just listening in on someone else's therapy session. I'm hoping to still do more of these live sessions as episodes, but I took the foot off the gas on that particular angle or format once I got the feedback on that episode, even though I'm very grateful for the person who went on and agreed to share and be recorded. So I'm mostly reduced to a one-directional recording here. Like literally, I'm just talking to this mic. And I don't know who you are listening to me right now. And even when it's a one question, even if it was like an essay that I was given as a question, which I love, the more background information, the better. But I always still have so many more questions that the person asking, the questioner, hasn't even thought of as being relevant. But for me as a therapist are incredibly relevant and are necessary to understand and form some kind of diagnosis of what's at issue and what the problem is. And even then, as a good therapist, I ought to, and tried my best to, when I'm working with a client or clients or like in a group, try to withhold any judgment, final judgment. It's more of a working hypothesis that I form as I get to know the client better in my own experience, in my own therapy training, has taught me that the best thing to do is always ask the client's parts why they are thinking this or what this is reminding them of or going through the process with them. Because at least half the time, if not more often, it's completely surprising what they reveal. And then it's like, oh, no wonder they're reacting in this way to this stimuli or being triggered in this way by this. Now it makes sense. And it makes even more sense and is often even more elegant in terms of an explanation for what is happening than the working hypothesis that I formed in the beginning, just off of the written answers or surveys that they sent in before we even met, or from even our first session. The more I got to know them, the more complex and more rich they as an individual turned out to be. But in this podcast format, I'm reduced to working off of assuming this person is like the other people I've worked with, or reducing it to a kind of statistic in a sense of, well, the majority of men in this age range with this, demographic, whatever, would believe this or hold this or have experienced this. But I don't know if that's true for you in your situation. I don't even know from the commenters what your background is. And if I were to know, if I were to get that information, it would require pages and pages of comments. And that's just to get the background info. So as a therapist, and I try to be as honest and authentic as possible, especially as I'm getting older in this and in this particular podcast, I find it a challenge to serve and honestly, authentically, genuinely, sincerely answer the questions that are coming at me, especially when they're aggressive. And I can feel that there's a lot of emotion, often aggression, anger in the question. And I don't fully understand. I just have why that anger is there. I just have assumptions based on a couple of facts that they might have shared about themselves. But I know that if I were to sit down with them and had the hours to really get to know them, and they me, and we could form a relationship, a therapeutic relationship, that I would discover something much richer than anything that I could make up in my mind, which would be based off of other clients, other people I've met in the past, and demographic, psychographic research. So I am pleased to say that the Barbie movie analysis was rather polarizing, especially for my podcast. I generally see 95% positive reactions, often 99% positive reactions in terms of thumbs up versus thumbs down on this podcast episode feedback, right? But on this one, it was more polarized. It's something like 75% positive or 80% positive, which was unusual for my podcast. Now, I have come to see over the past month that is a weakness of my podcast because I'm not polarizing enough. And that's something that I was thinking of doing an episode on. Maybe you might be interested on the sort of behind the scenes thinking about the direction of this podcast. I definitely think I should be more polarizing. But I was actually surprised by the degree of anger, it seemed, in the comments. And at least half of the negative comments let me know that they hadn't even listened to the episode. They were just going off of the show description. And unfortunately, based on what they shared, there was very little that I could learn from them as far as how I could improve, other than the fact that they thought I was wrong and that they were very offended that I would even support a feminist movie, or that I was sisterhood adjacent, which the fact that I have an older sister, a younger sister, I love my sisters. I have and take pride in having close female friends, and I have a wife that I love and a goddaughter who literally saved my life. So I'm very indebted to women, females in my life. So I'm happily sisterhood adjacent. And anyone who's against my sisters, either real or in spirit, I will valiantly defend my sisters. But instead of complaining that they don't understand me, far more productive, I think, is just recognizing and owning the fact that I don't fully understand them and their point of view. But now I'm getting into the third point out of 4 that I had planned. So let me go back to the first to set up where I'm going with this. So the first point is I may not be able to understand you fully right now in this format where I'm just talking into a mic and then waiting like a week for your few paragraphs. Again, this format is limiting. I'd much prefer to interact with you live. But one thing that really stood out in these negative comments was their anger around how the Barbie movie treated the male characters. And here's one comment by Bill Usher 2265. And here Bill says, I'm quoting from his first paragraph of his long comment, "Every male character in the Barbie movie is either incompetent, a bad person, or pathetic." So, since almost all the male characters were Kens, if I just talk about Ken, I hope that I can directly address this view. And I'm starting to get it. It took a few weeks to understand and just let these comments marinate. And I want to be as humble as possible. Again, this is my third point. I want to be as humble as possible in recognizing that I am not experiencing this inner turmoil, or whatever you would call it, rage, anger, against this movie because of its depiction of men or male characters. And I want to understand it. But here is why I have a very sympathetic view of Ken. I wanted to call this episode an ode to Ken because I very much related to the Ken character, and I thought it was a really clever depiction and, of course, a brilliant performance by Ryan Gosling. So it turns out when Barbie launched in the late 50s, early 60s, it was immediately popular and sold out its first line, and then its popularity kept growing. Let's see, in this news report, as Barbie's popularity grew, Mattel released new dolls, new clothes, and a range of haircuts, including one modeled after First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy after former President JFK was assassinated. According to Paul Mullins, an anthropology professor at Indiana University, the first 5 years were actually some of Barbie's most progressive years. She had no Ken to rely on, and instead of a housework, she was independent, working as a nurse, an American Airlines stewardess, or a ballerina. Still rather stereotyped female occupations, but hey, this is the late 50s. And then in 1961, Mattel released the Ken doll named after Ruth Handler's, the creator's, son, Kenneth, after fans begged for Barbie to have a boyfriend. Handler made sure Ken was never the husband and only the boyfriend. His role was to be a sidekick, because, of course, this is the Barbie line of dolls. Now, what's interesting about that is here Barbie is first, obviously, and then from that, after a few years, Ken was created as her companion, her sidekick. And this flips the script that you find in the Bible and in a lot of Western and Eastern civilization, where the man was first. Adam was first in the Bible, and then Eve was created from Adam's rib as a kind of a companion partner, as a supporting role. But here you have a dystopia, and I think from the beginning all the way to the end, it's a kind of dystopia. It's a weird universe, the Barbie world, Barbie land, where Ken dolls are made as an afterthought. There was never meant to be an equality in Barbie land. That's part of the running joke. In my childhood, in the 80s, when I was growing up, it was like G.I. Joe and Transformers. Those were the guy toys. And Barbie-like dolls were available as girls' toys. So the world of these men's dolls is actually these other worlds, G.I. Joe, Transformers, as I mentioned, He-Man. And this is me growing up in the 80s. I looked up when the Barbie cartoons started, and it wasn't until the 2000s. But of course, I knew about Barbie dolls. They were already in ascendancy, like it's just mentioned, since the late 50s. So part of the running joke in the Barbie movie is, what is it like to be the sidekick male in an all-girl world made for girls? That's part of the joke. Now, what was much more clever than that was, again, Ken is not supposed to represent men. He has no genitalia, right? Neither does she. They don't even know what sex is. That's why I was saying earlier, they're stuck in this adolescent level of maturity because they don't actually know what sex is. They haven't actually gone through puberty. They're not actually horny. They're like the guys, many of whom I have made content for and have worked with, who primarily are not after sexual gratification when it comes to women, because actually that on its own is a relatively straightforward thing to satisfy, get taken care of. This is an economic decision. This is like men who are emotionally needy for women. Apart from sexual gratification, though, of course, they feel that need in the background, or maybe they perceive that primarily consciously as their need, but unconsciously what they're really after is love, connection, significance, approval, and being told that they're enough, that they're worthy. So look, it might have come across, I'm starting to see this now, that my descriptions of the white knight syndrome or of nice guys is like some kind of insult thrust at guys on the internet I've never met. It's not. Everything that I'm sharing, is from my own experience. Me personally, I've gone through this and I've been that way. And if I haven't, I say that explicitly because then I know I have to own up to the fact that I lack inside knowledge of it. It's based off of research or people I've worked with. And I understand that this may not be clear because so far the main story that I've told about the period in my life around which I started getting into Red Pill and kind of lost myself in it for like 6 to 8, 9 months. The main story is what led up to that, which was the attempted suicide. And there was like 2 attempts over a period of, was it about 2, 3 weeks? Actually, it's more like 2 or 3 months. And in the telling of it so far in the videos I've made, I skip from me on the ledge of a 57th story building, looking down and then being pulled off the ledge by a very good friend, and then him going on a suicide watch for a couple weeks, and then me getting some advice that I had ignored previously. And I thought, well, what could I lose? And I got into psychotherapy. And even then, it still took a long time. So a couple of months later, I tried to off myself again by riding a motorcycle. I was on a motorcycle trip with some good friends who were trying to help me out, but on the motorcycle trip, it's like 7, 8, 9 hours of riding. And when you're riding on these mountains, you're not like talking to anyone. So, I'm on my own and I'm thinking, well, this would be a beautiful way to go out. I've shared this before. I've even shared footage of myself on that day doing kind of selfie video, just kind of showing the beautiful scenery. And I thought, this is beautiful scenery. And if I just go out here, it would be a great ending. It was just sadness, no anger. And it wasn't even really active sadness. I wasn't crying or anything. I just thought, I've experienced everything I've wanted. And I couldn't see anything that would excite me going forward. And I shared in the video that you can find on my YouTube channel. It's the featured video that you'd see if you're not a subscriber yet. And I talked about how I discovered what it's like to experience unconditional love flowing from me and not requiring anything in return. And the object of my love, the person I was wanting to see, I figured I'd stay around on this planet long enough to just watch her grow up. And that was my goddaughter, who was turning 2 years old at the time. And I'm currently writing a book, and I shouldn't even be saying that because every time I do, I know I get a little dopamine hit of like, hey, I'm writing a book, but it's taking a long time. And part of the reason is because I'm revisiting so many painful moments from my past. And often when I do revisit these moments, I come to them with a new perspective and I experience them differently and I see new perspectives. And it causes me to reflect and discover new things about myself and about life. And I realize I'm actually never done growing, even from the events and memories from the past, that those are a treasure trove of insights and life-transforming lessons. In one phase of my life that I don't think I've shared much, I think I've only shared it in the first time I spoke with Steve Maeda about the Red Pill, which I have not republished on this podcast, but what is in the Man Up series of video podcasts on my YouTube channel. And even there, I don't think I went into much detail. So let me help you understand my journey into Red Pill and out of it, and how and why I relate and can relate so much to Ken. The precipitating reason, the surface level reason, I was standing on the 57th floor of the Marina Bay Sands Hotel looking down, trying to jump, which, by the way, you might be glad to know, they make it really hard to clear that jump, which you don't know until you're trying to get to the edge. Anyway, I'm standing there trying to work up the courage and then also figuring out how to get there to the very edge. The reason I was there was because my girlfriend that I'd been dating as boyfriend-girlfriend for like 4.5, 5 years at that point, off and on, so that gets more complicated, had cheated on me on a girls' vacation out. And I discovered this in a way that, I didn't handle it well. I just confronted her with it and then it blew up. And then she actually publicized this in a very dramatic way on her social media. And this is back, early 2010s when there weren't that many social media platforms. So everyone was on Facebook and Instagram. There wasn't TikTok or even Snapchat. And she's posting photos of herself making out with this guy. And this guy she just basically met. And then just a month before that, there were photos of the two of us hand in hand on a red carpet. So it's pretty clear what was going on to anyone just casually even scrolling through her socials. And instead of thinking, wow, I dodged that bullet, or good thing I figured that out now rather than later, or until I was even further deep in that quicksand mud, Instead, I felt like how Ken felt. And I discovered, just like Ken did, Barbie has a great day every day, but Ken only has a great day if Barbie looks at him. Everything else in my life was the same. It was just that she had cheated on me, but everything else stayed the same. And yet that fact spoiled my enjoyment of all the rest of my life, all the good stuff I had in my life. And no amount of rational thinking or intellectual reminder of, hey, appreciate the good stuff, mattered. Not until I was face to face with really trying to drive that motorcycle, ride it right off the cliff, did I finally discover one thing that was worth living for. And it was the experience of unconditional love flowing from me. That was it. None of the other stuff mattered, and I totally understand this at a deep experiential level. But it actually took me even longer to discover and fully understand why I was led to this dark, depressing place where I wanted to end my life. So discovering unconditional love flowing from me kept me going, kept me on this earth, but it didn't explain why I was hurt so deeply and badly by this young woman who had cheated on me. And I too went on it's 6 to 8, 9 months of anger. And I'd say the first 6 months, I was really aggressive with it, to the point where I think I offended some of my guy friends' girlfriends, and they made these guy friends stop hanging out with me for a long while because I was so angry to how the world was skewed to her side, the cheater, and how it seemed like she was getting away with it. And there were only a few people on my side, good friends, mostly men, but some women. But even some of these women later turned to her side, and I learned a lot from that. And I became a lot less naive and a lot more cynical about the world. So to make sense of the anger and betrayal and hurt that I was feeling, I turned to the internet. And alongside reading these very complex, deep, but also abstruse psychotherapy texts like Karen Horney's work or Carl Jung's work, which, to be honest, were written a long time ago and weren't obviously immediately applicable to my life and my pain at that time. But I was starting to soak in these ideas, these concepts. And alongside that, I was getting into what would be considered sort of the forefathers of Red Pill. That's the way I see it, which was like early manosphere. And I'm talking the Solomon 2 blog, which I have mentioned before in, I think, the last episode, the Jonah Hill one, as well as the Return of Kings blog. There's another one called the Heart East, Heart IST, Heart East. And I think the Return of Kings is down now because that person has taken another route, which is also interesting from a psychotherapy perspective. And I don't know if Heart East is still up. I hope they're not. But it was a lot easier for me to be sympathetic and empathetic to their points of view because I was going through that. And there was this desire, this wish, this yearning for life and society to go back to the 80s, or actually back to the 50s, where they would have shamed with like a scarlet A branded on her body, this ex who had cheated on me. They would have shamed her, and she couldn't show her face in society because of how much she had hurt me and how she was so morally corrupt and how she did the immoral thing. I was totally in this self-righteous mode. And then, of course, when that ran out of energy because I was so angry, then it would devolve into how could you have done this to me? And then it's like oscillating between these two extremes of anger and sadness, but mostly anger, probably 80% of the times anger, because I have very strong warrior parts and achiever parts who are looking for solutions to problems. So they're looking for problems to solve. And this was one of the problems. And the problem, from my view at that time, for that 6 months, where I would start counting from about the time I first tried to commit suicide, and then coming to terms with it, like, I can't turn the clock back on this, and we can't get back together and just forget this. And then I would from there, I would count forward to like 6 to 8, 9 months. And in some ways, I would count right up until I met my now wife, who disconfirmed a lot of what I had believed and harbored and thought was impossible. It's like what these red pill guys, or like, I don't know, the average dude who trolls on the internet thinks is a unicorn or impossible. A woman who is feminine, but her femininity also, it comes with or encompasses integrity and standards, and she's young and blah, 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 right? And she's helped me to see that while they are still a very small minority of women, just as I believe good men of real integrity are also the small minority of men. So these women who are attractive and all these other things you're looking for, and have morals are a small minority of women. They still exist, and they're still out there. But in that first year, fresh off that cheating, the betrayal, and then the ensuing hurt, I didn't have any hope to find attractive women of integrity. And even if they did exist, I didn't think I knew or could tell whether they were or not, because clearly I was wrong on this one that I had invested a whole bunch of time and energy into. So it was a massive wake-up call. And it was like, you don't know how to navigate this world of relationships where you're having to find and place your bets on one person. You may know a whole lot about how to get a majority, which might only be 51%, right, to count as a majority, of women into bed with you. And really all that's required is excelling in the first hour to 4 hours of meeting them. And with some of them, you might be playing the long game. But whatever, it's nothing compared to the 5 years 4 or 5 years that I was with this one, and the 50 years that would be required for a marriage. And at that time, being in a relationship for 5 years, I thought I was qualified and had the experience to dole out relationship advice. And by the way, my relationship course, Rock Solid Relationships, I created much after, with a lot of growth after this betrayal. I was like 5 years after. And even then, I've grown a ton since then, especially in terms of relationship knowledge and experience. But luckily, revisiting the RSR material, all of it is true and will prepare you to get into and strengthen any relationship that you find yourself in, even if it's a casual one, and especially one that you want to grow for the long term. But back then in the early 2010s, it was a wake-up call that I really didn't know how to navigate these waters. In fact, maybe I didn't even know which waters I was in. So this manosphere and proto-red pill world that I found myself in, which was really angry at women, in the way, in a sense, his response to discovering patriarchy. So for me, that was like me discovering manosphere red pill. He discovered this patriarchy thing and then just took it and ran with it because this at least got him power. And me taking back my power, thinking all women are bitches and lying hoes. And one of the things that really hammered this home for me when I was first trying to just recover from the breakup was we were living in Singapore at the time, both she and the ex, and coming fresh off this betrayal that she just plastered all over her socials. She was really attractive. She had a lot of connections. She was quite young. So a girl in her early 20s has always got more power in a nightclub than a guy who is not buying a $10K table. Even a guy who's buying like splashing $10,000 minimum spend on bottles to book a table in a club in Singapore. And now that might be $25,000 given inflation. Even then they might say, "Sir, you've offended this beautiful young woman who has a lot of friends and is beautiful and can bring in even bigger spenders than you." That's what they're not going to say that, but that's what they're thinking. "So we're going to have to kick you out in a dispute." Let alone a guy like me who comes from a pickup artist background where we're taught never to spend any money right in the club and instead to get good at gaming the whole system. That I was hanging out at the VIP red rope, and there was instances when I didn't have the connections to get through there. And there were a few times that I'm thinking right now where I'm hanging there at that red rope and I'm having to pull all kinds of strings. I'm on my phone texting, and then there are these women who are very attractive, the Miss Singapores and that sort of thing, who are friends of mine, telling me they're just throwing their hands up like, I wish I could get you in, but I don't have the pull here. And it's because inside is some celebrity. He might be a C-lister in Hollywood, but in the early 2010s in Singapore, a C-lister in Hollywood is an A-lister in Singapore. So they're going to bend over backwards for this celebrity who on that corporate spend, whatever company is sponsoring to bring him into Singapore, they're going to spend, unlimited. And they've got that extra security around what they used to call the dragon table. That's the $50,000 spend table. And there she is, my ex, right in the center of the whole thing. And the celebrity's talking to her, trying to mac on her. And actually, the incident that I'm thinking of was just before she cheated, about a month before, when I was the boyfriend at the time. And I'm telling the security guy, like, "Hey, look, I was supposed to go in there," because actually we were holding hands as we were going in, and then we got separated, and she just kept going. Yeah, there were a lot of red flags like that I totally ignored, just like Ken. And it's ironic because the kind of the humor of the movie is that Ken has to have ignored it because he was created as the rib. He's created as the partner in this sense. And that was hilariously handled in the movie, of course. But I was not a Ken. I responded like Ken, right? But I was I was like a human being. I was not in Barbie land. I was in like the world, and I couldn't get in there. And she totally like ignored me, just walked in. And she acted as if she assumed that I would just walk in, because I usually do have the pull, but not in this case. And I got the rope put right in front of my, my belt, kind of like right in my stomach. The bouncer's like, "So sorry, man." And I've seen him a few times as a special event bouncer, but still he's like, "I can't let you in. I'm going to get in trouble if I do." And this whole thing's coming out. And then I had to pull some serious strings emailing. You can believe it? Emailing on my phone. And then eventually I was able to show the email to the bouncer. He called in this supervisor. I think it was like someone handling the celebrity's agenda or itinerary. And then she okayed it, and then the bouncer could let me in. And then I got in. But it was ridiculous how much more I had to work when all she had to do was be hot. And that was a harbinger of things to come.
No matter their physical strength, for many men, emotions are too much for them to handle. It's why they can't give women the deeper levels of emotional intimacy and connection that they crave. It's why they fail to be the man that modern women desire most. A man with inner strength. A man who has mastered his emotions. Find out how to master your emotions through David Tien's Emotional Mastery Program. The Emotional Mastery Program is a step-by-step system that integrates the best of empirically verified psychotherapy methods and reveals how to master your internal state and develop the inner strength that makes you naturally attractive, happy, and fulfilled. Learn more about this transformational program by going to davidtianphd.com/emotional mastery. That's DAVIDTIANPHD.com/emotional mastery.
There was many a night in the 3 months after that betrayal, 2 to 3 months, where the wing that I hung out with the most during that time was also going through a breakup and had a net worth of almost $1 billion. I mean, he could buy his way in, and he didn't do that very often at all because he was hyper-connected. But we were always the sort of hangers-on. We'd have to do all this extra stuff. We either have to pay or we have to pull strings. And these beautiful young women in their early 20s, just sauntered in just because they were hot. That was the system in Singapore. But I've seen this all around the world, teaching pickup all around the world, like in New York City especially. I've seen this where you'd have to have a recognizable, like at least a B-list celebrity in order to trump a really beautiful young woman, because that's how clubs worked. If there were clubs with just rich guys and no beautiful women in it, it would die really fast because the rich guys would just take their money and leave. The whole reason they're there is to mac on the hot girls. So the currency of the nightlife is hot women who don't mind being objectified and valued in this way. And trust me, in their early 20s, they do not mind getting all this free treatment, free VIP red carpet treatment at all. Now, one exception to this, the sort of status fame thing, and then also just buying your way in, is having great social skills. And since that time, I've met a few rare individuals who can get in, and in some cases get 17 dudes in with them at the top clubs, while the models were forced to wait outside for half an hour. Anyway, those are massive exceptions. Shout out to Andrew for those who know. But the point is, I was bitter. I was angry. I did not like how the system worked. I did not like how it rewarded hot women. And in the comments when she posted these photos, they weren't saying, like, it was just about face. Like, it would go from that. One week she posted on my profile on Facebook, "I miss you so much," because she's away on this trip, right? "I miss you so much. I love you," whatever. "Can't wait to get back together with you." And again, like this public posting between couples, if you guys do that, nowadays I see that is a big red flag. But anyway, this was sort of the norm, and I didn't know any better, right? So this is sort of like me as a Ken, a naive Ken living in Barbie land, right? So anyway, she posts all this stuff, and then the next week she's posting, because I confronted her, figured it out, and kind of kicked her out and everything, and then she got really angry and got her revenge by, all this stuff back and forth. It was awful. She'd post a photo of her making out with this new guy, and all the comments underneath were so super supportive. And on the sly, about a month or so later, when I was super depressed and just sort of staring out into space, I had not learned meditation yet. I had not done any psychotherapy work. That was several months down the road. And I actually, at that point, hadn't even started reading any kind of deep psychotherapy. a few of her friends reached out to me quietly, hey, how you doing? Just checking in. Because I just went silent because I had nothing to actually compare. She's just showing off her life, her social life, and how exciting and all that stuff it was. And that's the social currency that was rewarded. Suddenly society rewarded the cheater, the liar, the one who was immoral, the one who, in my view, was the one who lacked integrity. I was the one who was cheated on, and yet they were championing and supporting the cheater. So I was, my problem-solving parts immediately went into let's figure out how to Machiavellian manipulate this situation so that I can not just regain my own power, but take more power. And then that was in the land. That's when I really connected with the red pill energy of let's take it back, let's get revenge, let's change the system. And I totally was into that. And I think that this scared off a bunch of my guy friends, his girlfriends, like I mentioned, and they were sort of the collateral damage. Sorry about that. Some of them are still not talking to me. So that period when Ken came back to Barbie Land and installed patriarchy and let's stick it back to them for all these years of being neglected and, being trodden on and all that, right? I totally got that energy and had all kinds of schemes and strategies for getting as much sex with hot women as possible now. And at that point, I'd already ridden to the high, but I was going to get it in a kind of power way, not in a way where it was like, let me seduce them so that was a sign of my own worth. Now it was more like, let's get it back. And all is fair and love and war and that sort of thing. Actually, that's a pretty tame way to put it. Luckily, I didn't actually follow through with any of these Machiavellian type of strategies, except a few that kind of were just aimed at her and her alone. And they fizzled out pretty quick. Like the satisfaction I got from pulling off one of those things that hurt her was like, yay. And then the same day it was like, okay, now my life's still the same. It's not changed the material reality of it. I still have this sadness and this loneliness and this real confusion that I didn't even understand. Luckily, I had so many strong women in my life, like I mentioned growing up, role models in a way, and female friends who, even if they were sleeping around, would try to do it just like I did, in the most ethical way possible, trying their best not to lead anyone on and all of that stuff. And I just also adopted this. And even we were getting consent before consent was a thing. Because the last thing you want is all this drama from someone who is like hanging on. So I'm not going to take too much credit for this, but I quickly discovered how empty that mode of revenge anger was, how deeply unsatisfying it was. And I think just looking back now, and I need to reflect more on this, but my hypothesis is that my early years, up till about 29 or so, I would identify as an evangelical Christian. And part of that worldview is that there's a small minority. I was from a Reformed evangelical Christian, that it's a small minority of human beings who will make the choice from their free will to believe in Jesus Christ, blah, 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 to be saved, to make it to heaven. So I was already used to thinking that this small minority was the elect. And it wasn't counterintuitive to me that it would turn out to be that only a small minority of human beings, especially hot women, would be good. And I was it was tempered by quite a lot of maturity because I was forced to mature through this process. And I recognized how even when I was rampaging through my hedonism, I was well-intentioned. I didn't want to hurt anyone. I just wanted to have some fun and to maximize it because I believed that at that point, evolution was all there is, and I better get some fun before I die on this planet, this rock, hurtling through the universe, right? But I had no intention to harm anyone. And I could see that there was this immaturity then, now from my perspective in the, coming out of the red pill, and I didn't judge that. And I don't judge it now. Now, it might come across that I have parts that do this podcast, and now I'm starting to transition into the third point. There are parts of me that are in charge of or like to do public speaking. The parts of me that I activate in therapy don't like to do public speaking because there's so much humility there. Like I was kind of sharing at the beginning. I don't really know you yet, and I reserve judgment on that, even 10, 20 sessions in. These parts of you that you may not even know, and you might have just met in our session, may reveal these roots or sources of your behavior that you didn't even know consciously. So if they don't even know themselves, it's crazy to think that I could know them that deeply. But what would happen for a one-dimensional, like a one-way podcast like this one, where I'm speaking into a mic, like it's almost like a talk, right, or a sermon, is that my therapy parts would say nothing. Now I have these teaching parts. I have multiple ones that might come online at different times to handle this work because they enjoy a lot of it. And sometimes those parts come across as demeaning or arrogant because we've got a quirky sense of humor. And I find many mistakes I made in the past kind of funny in retrospect. And if you can't joke about it, I mean, it kind of shows you haven't learned from it and fully owned it and integrated it. But also beware that humor can be a mechanism for distracting or changing the subject. So eventually I felt it was quite empty. The anger and the rage just sort of dissipated because I recognized that there must be some people who are good, who are also attractive. And I knew that there were women who were good because I grew up with them and I knew plenty. And as far as them being attractive, it seemed like that was just like a genetic thing and maybe an upbringing thing. And it was just a matter of scouring the earth. And here's one place where I'm quite different from almost, but not all, men I meet and talk to, which is at that point in my life, I had the freedom to work remotely. This is the early 2010s. And Singapore was really expensive, still is, and maybe even more so now. So I broke my lease early. I put some stuff in storage, but I put most of my stuff into 5 or 6 suitcases, and then I moved to of all places, the W in Bangkok, the W Hotel in Bangkok, which had just opened and had this great promotional rate. Because I'd figured I was going to Bangkok quite a bit for pleasure trips, and I was doing the math, and I realized I could live at the W in any hotel in that range for cheaper or at least the same price as what I was paying in rent for my 2-bedroom condo in downtown Singapore. And I didn't need to be in Singapore all the time for my work. I still had tons of client work in Singapore, but I could batch it. And the immersive experience for the clients is actually better, though it does take a lot more energy from me. So I made that move. I could just up and go. And along with that freedom and the kind of minimalism, still I had 5 or 6 suitcases. So this is sort of like luxury nomad. And I could store the luggage at the W and I would pop in and out so I wouldn't even need anything more than a tourist visa. I was constantly traveling. And I loved it. And I was quickly racking up the nights, so I got to the ambassador status at the old Starwood, which is now Marriott, pretty quickly and living that life. And I cracked the miles hacking thing, so I was always flying business class. And by the way, I teach how to do this in my course, Lifestyle Mastery. But that was just along the way. This was just a way to get some fresh air. I wanted to just get out of the stale, for me, environment where I couldn't compete against my ex, who was an attractive, still young woman coming into the prime of her, her femininity or whatever. And now looking back, still going through early stages of maturity, in her early 20s, which is to be expected. But I had not taken that into account. And I didn't know any of this stuff, developmental psychology, really. Actually, developmental psychology for adults, for young adults. So I just upped and went. And this was a breath of fresh air for me. I got a new environment, cut off all the old anchors, could set new anchors, and it was awesome. And instead of giving into the despair of the red pill, and then some guys went to black pill, I didn't get into that because, like I was saying, I was used to thinking of the elite. Like, all through high school, we're looking at getting into the top schools and getting into the, the only A in the class and all that. I was used to thinking in this upper area, right? And so I was already used to thinking the minority. I'd be in the small minority. So when it came down to, it's a very small minority of women who are attractive and have integrity and have the other things you're looking for, that just kind of made sense. And it's just like, okay, I need to search, to widen the search net, right? So I did. So I started living in Bangkok, and then I could kind of meet women in Thailand. It hurt that I couldn't speak Thai at all or very well. So in Thailand, I was limited to English-speaking women. But still, there was quite a lot. And then I would go to Indonesia, which is a country I know many Americans, many Westerners don't know that it's like the 4th largest, most populous country in the world, almost 300 million people in Indonesia, also the largest Muslim country in the world. I know you probably don't know that if you grew up in the West, because I didn't know that until like my first year living in Singapore. And there are a lot of rich Indonesians who went to international schools or learned English. So there was that world. And so I think I could spread my net of possible women that I could meet and get into a relationship with, not just in all of Southeast Asia, which really widened it up, versus little Singapore, which is a city-state of 5 million people total. really widened it up for all of Southeast Asia, but I could also easily fly out to China, Japan, Korea, which I did. And then I also went on trips to Russia, Eastern Europe, the Baltics, Latvia, Estonia. So I was open to going anywhere. I'm looking for a 1 in a million woman. And I said that to myself, and I'm like, okay, how do I meet these? How many millions do I have to expose myself to in a way? And then I got a lot more strategic. I was on Instagram looking for attractive women and then just triangulating to meet them. I actually have a system to do that, and it was working relatively well. It just took a little time, but it was also fun. So it wasn't like a difficulty for me. So I came out of that red pill cynicism of all women are this, or I've seen this online where comments are like, get a woman to like you or whatever. Yeah, you'll have to make more money than her, says the comment. And that's impossible, right? I read that. It was a comment on one of our ads that we were putting on Facebook about how to connect with women. It was like, yeah, you'll have to make more money than the woman, and that's impossible. That belief never has occurred to me until I read it. And I don't think it's ever occurred to any of my in-person clients. And part of the problem here is to work with me in person is quite expensive because you're taking my time, which is not scalable. And I'm looking at it now over the past month, and I suspected this, but I kind of sat down and looked at it deeper. My clientele is mostly top 5% earners, especially for their age. For their age, it'd be even higher. And then top 20% overall. So I know very little, actually, about what it's like to be in the bottom 20% of earners, and I would say even the bottom 50% of worldly success, and then even the bottom 50% of success with women. Like, I felt like I had no success with women growing up, but actually, now that I look back at it, when I was 16, I lost my virginity to one of the most attractive girls in the school, and we dated until I graduated, and then we broke up the summer before college. But, I would be in the cafeteria with some guy friends, and then she would sneak up behind me, kind of surprise and hug me from behind and plant a big kiss on my cheek. And we just like quickly say, I'll see you after class. You're like, yeah, I'll see you after class. Great. And then I turn back and I look, these guys are looking at me like, and they'll say multiple times, like, Dave, you're a really lucky guy. And I'm just like, yeah, thanks. Because I have no control. I had no control over that. I have no idea why she liked me at that time. And maybe even now I don't know exactly. And I didn't know at that time, and I didn't know for the next 15 years or so, how to control it. If there was a girl that I liked that didn't like me back, I had no idea what to do to get her to like me more. I was just being me, and then I had the grace of these girls to like me, but I was being liked. And for me, it is actually arrogant I discovered, for me to speak on behalf of all Kens, or all those who hate their Kenness. Because in a way, I've grown out of that Ken phase, luckily, and I totally got it when Barbie said to Ken, and I don't remember the exact line, but it was something along the lines of, you've got to find out who you are apart from me. They don't have to be Barbie and Ken. They can be Barbie and they can be Ken separately. And I had to learn that the hard way. It took years. In fact, it took all my life up until that point in my mid-30s for that to sink in. And this is actually backed up by evolutionary psychology, for the thing that the red pill really loves. Evo Psych, Jeffrey Miller's amazing book, The Mating Mind, has shown that art was evolved as a way for men to woo women, to seduce women, to win over women. And this is true in almost, just from an Evo Psych perspective, almost all male achievement, like the Taj Mahal, that sort of thing, is from a desire to dominate in the mating hierarchy, either over competition from other men for a woman or for women, or to directly win over a woman. And this might be something for you to think about as a fun thought experiment in sci-fi. Imagine a kind of dystopian world, and for whatever reasons, you can make up some kind of like virus or whatever, where they have to sequester all of the females in some areas of the world behind these high walls or whatever you can't get through. And then all the men are just on their own. You got to, do whatever you got to do to keep society going. And then there's sort of like a lottery or a draw of some kind where you're chosen as a man to be taken to where the women are so that you can inseminate and continue the human race and so on. And then it's totally random. Like, it doesn't really depend on anything that you can control. Or let's make it a little bit easier to believe that maybe they're looking for genetics. So you can't really control that. That's determined by birth. So they're looking for good genetics. And the rest of the time, you're just going to do whatever you need to do. Like, And I'm thinking, I can see myself basically not caring so much about my clothes. I'd be in like very functional wear. I'd have like cargo pants on with lots of pockets, you know? I just shave my head because it's just a bunch of dudes. Who cares about your hair? Actually, it'd be slicker like GSP in a fight. You know, I've just thought a lot about that. Like an all boys situation, a lot of the things that we do, like peacocking and all that, would just go by the wayside. And I haven't explored this as much as the toxic shame that drives the achiever. But at a level above that is the desire to get to win, the approval to be worthy of a woman, this ideal woman in your mind, which if you ask a psychotherapist, you can trace it back to probably a mother figure, if not mother outright, to win over the affection of the women that are your ideal. And there's no shame around that. That's how the animal kingdom works. And that's exactly what's happening in the Ken Barbie world. See, here's the thing that we men trick ourselves into thinking, we don't need women. We don't really care about them. We're just going to do our own man thing. And if you have testosterone and you've gone through puberty, that is not true for you anymore. Like that whole thing that you might have gone through in grade school, girls rule, boys drool, or like girls have got cuties and all this. After you go through puberty, you're not in that world no more. You want to get the women to like you, and not just for sex, which is, again, a minority of maybe a minor need that you're trying to meet for most guys. I understand that some guys, that's like an overriding thing. But what's underneath that, underlying it, or maybe more dominant than just the sexual gratification, is to have women approve you, give you their stamp of approval, that you are worthy of being attracted to. And how do you know that? When she spreads her legs for you and says or demonstrates that she wants to have sex with you. Then there's that validation. And, you know, it might be obvious now, and it's obvious to me now, that as a pickup artist, and all successful pickup artists are validation seeking through their behavior, because women ultimately are the ones, the judges, for whether they are a good pickup artist or not, obviously. Imagine someone who says he's a good pickup artist and no women like him. That would just be total fraud, right? So who is going to judge, who is going to demonstrate that, how is he going to demonstrate that he's a good pickup artist or attractive as a man or worthy as a man, or in Ken's term, you know, enough, it was women. And the guys who are blind to that are still at an even earlier level. And I'm not saying that in a demeaning way where there's like levels, because I'm going to get to that comment. I just mean it that I went through that earlier and I get it. And it's sweet in a way, because it's sweet in a way that a young boy is in his kind of innocence and he wants the girls to like him. And I get that. And my son will go through that, and that's normal. And that he and all men, if you want to find happiness as an adult male, is going to have to go through that process of coming to believe that you are enough apart from whether women are attracted to you or not. Question is, do you like yourself? Do you love yourself? And that was beautifully put in the phrase or the term kenuff, that Ken finally realized that he is kenuff. And of course, it is a process, so I'm sure they're going to set that up with their sequel that they have planned. Okay, so let me read out this comment to Bill Usher's comment by Euros Zivkovic, 9988. And he begins his comment with, "Hello, David. I think you should stick to dating advice, as this seems to go far beyond that, honestly." Yeah, it does. I don't want to do dating advice anymore. And that was like one of those things like, holy crap, how did this guy think I was just about dating advice? So look for some big moves, hopefully in the next several months, to make it clearer what I'm doing here. And I'm going to skip to the bottom and then come back into the middle. So the bottom, he says, "I also have to add that the way you speak about men watching this, the Barbie movie, is incredibly arrogant and demeaning. One critique most men have with movies such as this." That phrase, one critique most men have with movies such as this, was gold for me. So thank you, Euros. I can't say I can thank you for all of the other nasty comments you put later, but this one was great because you taught me something. You showed me that I missed why these guys were so angry about this, because they believe that the movie is making fun of Ken, when the way I saw it was Ken was the freaking hero. So Barbie was, of course, going through her own character arc. To me, it was going to be quite obvious, right? But for Ken, it was totally new, like to even contemplate that, like this kind of sidekick that was created, a male created for a female world, and what it would be like to live in that and to genetically, in a sense, be created for that. it was hilarious and fascinating all at the same time. And I didn't see his character arc as demeaning at all, because that was my character arc leading up to my mid-30s. And I thought it was awesome. And the message was great. And I recognize now that the way that Bill had seen the Kens as, how did he put it, incompetent, bad person, or pathetic. I do believe that they were meant to display Will Ferrell as incompetent and, because the guy's a comedian and he's supposed to be making fun of himself. That's part of the shtick, right? But the Kens, those guys were awesome. I thought they were hilarious and very clever. And what he's seeing is that one critique most men have with movies such as this, in their depiction of Ken, they're coming across as arrogant and demeaning to Euros. I think, if Euros was sitting in front of me, I would want to confirm that. But what I'm getting from his and other comments is that they thought and felt that the way Ken was depicted was demeaning. Whereas I thought it was incredibly empathetic. Like, I really connected with it. And as a result, I had a lot of understanding for that guy, Ken. And it was just brilliantly played, and it was hilarious. Okay, then he goes on, you present yourself as above the rest, as enlightened among the blind. I wouldn't say the rest. I'm pretty sure I quote and share as many sources as I can of other sources of wisdom and so on. Like I liberally quoted from my friend Mark Manson, I think in the last episode. But the whole reason I'm doing this is because, I think I have something that can help people. So I'm sort of guilty as charged. I think I am more enlightened than in this area. Otherwise, I'd have nothing to share here. I shouldn't even hit record, right? I think you could do some maturing and growing as well. I think so too. And part of this episode is me maturing and growing and sharing some of that I've come to terms with the fact that I don't understand from the inside what it's like to be a bottom 20% or maybe even a bottom 50% guy. Because even when it comes to attracting women, especially worldly success, especially academics, like I have 3 master's degrees and a PhD, and school is a relative breeze for me. But when it came to the area of women, I still had girlfriends. In fact, from my first girlfriend till I started pickup, or till my first marriage, I didn't go without a girlfriend for more than 8 months. And that was pointed out to me by the girls I was dating. And the thing is, I felt like I had no control over that because I didn't choose these women. They chose me. And the ones that I liked that didn't like me back, there was nothing I could do about it. I didn't understand it at all. So for me, I felt powerless. But looking back at it now, I was not experiencing the level of desperation and I had a lot of privilege just genetically and so on. Even intelligence is a privilege. Hard work, your work ethic in many ways can be traced to genetics, whether you've inherited this hard work. And it might, even if it's not genetic, it could be through your upbringing because you had a hardworking dad or whatever. So I am mature enough now, and will hopefully keep maturing, to recognize that I can't take credit for all of this privilege, all of these gifts. I can just appreciate them. And that doesn't take away from all the pain that I endured. Even first world problems are still problems. But I can humbly say, Euros, I think that's your first name, that I don't know your reality. Or even if you were to tell me in a comment back, I don't know enough to fully understand it, and I may never know enough to understand it from the inside. And that is my point in the Barbie analysis. The headline, the subject, the title is the Barbie movie, The Challenge of Centering a Foreign Point of View. And I talk about how hard it is to even understand, for me as an Asian Canadian man now living in Taiwan and who's lived in the West and the East almost equally in my life, how hard it is for me to understand a black man living in inner city America or Africa or, there's a lot of people's lives I can only understand, from a distance, as hard as I might try. And then to understand what it's like to be a woman, a female, biological female, going through these different phases of her life in different parts of the world, whatever, right? It's important when someone is showing you how they are experiencing life. If you want to understand them, that you sort of just shut up and try to learn as much as you can. I'm going to take that my own advice here with Euros, and I will say, I don't know where you're coming from fully, but I can feel your anger. And that must be based on some pain. I don't know the source of your pain. I can only guess, but I don't have enough information to go on it, so I can't speak to your issue directly. But you're damn right. I could do some maturing and growing, and I fully hope I do. I'm only middle-aged right now, and I hope this is not the end of my life. As you seem to think there is only one path, well, I do think there is an evolution, a developmental stages, and that's based on my life and what I've seen in others. But I know that there are a lot of exceptions, and I know that I also say you can jump around. And I also know that some people are built differently. Some who don't have the curiosity around, for instance, a player stage and sleeping around. That's awesome. You can skip that, right? So while I think most guys, maybe 51%, I feel pretty confident with that one, 51% or more of guys would do well to follow the path that I've been tracing out. And of course, I can't speak much about the path after me, right? So obviously I haven't gone through it. I can just sort of conjecture and that's based off of theory and hearing others who are in their 80s or whatever share. But I just share the best I can. And now I go to some of the middle, so I can address some quick questions here towards the end that hopefully I can address quickly. Could you please tell me why we should do the lots of extra work, understand a young woman fully, rather than doing all we can to make her understand how it is to be a male? Well, here's why. Hopefully you've all read 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Stephen Covey, a classic. I read it around the time it came out because my older sister, a woman, showed it to me and she was a fan. Anyway, one of the habits is seek to understand and then be understood. Now, if you're in business, if you've gotten any kind of negotiation training or even sales training, you know how important it is to understand your prospect or you're negotiating a partner, the person across the table from you, rather than just cramming your agenda down their throats without even bothering to understand them. That's why I do so much work understanding women. And I hopefully can translate that to your situation, you men, to sort of woman-splain what it's like to be a woman so you can relate to them better. You can connect with them better. That's part of what I do. That's part of one of the things I enjoy most about my work, actually, is being that bridge. And maybe I ought to do it the other way and do a lot more content for women. And hey, look out for that coming up, because it's the same sort of bridge work. And I can just stand in the gap here and just do the best I can based on what I see, given that I have a limited perspective, which is just me. And now we get into the next point. He asks, so hopefully I've addressed that. Why should you try to understand women rather than just trying to force her to understand you? Okay, well, hopefully that. And if that's not clear, go to the Stephen Covey book and read that section on seek to understand before being understood. Okay, next question. In what way do you think our point of view is necessarily male-centric? Then he goes through all of this other stuff. And he's just going off. I did a whole long podcast, as this one has turned out to be, explaining that, but he didn't get it, which totally, maybe I'll take responsibility as much as I can for that. Maybe I wasn't clear. In what way do you think our point of view is necessarily male-centric? I'll make it clear now. And he's replying to my reply to Bill Usher here. And in my reply, I wrote, no, like a duh, right? So I said, the main point was that as men, our point of view is necessarily male-centric, brackets, no duh. And I was alluding to this earlier in this long episode. What I was getting at is I'm a male. So maybe this is too philosophical a point for you. I'm a male, and this might be too obvious, so it's escaped you. I am male, biologically, and my brain is in this body of mine, which is male. And my senses are being filtered through this physical body, which is male. And in that sense, my experience of life is male-centric. My experience of life is not female-centric. My experience of life as an Asian person is not black-centric. My experience of life as someone who was raised in the West for 25 years is not that of someone who had his entire childhood in Taiwan, right? So it's not Taiwan-centric. The more I live here, the more easily it will be for me to understand and become Taiwan-centric, but it is a challenge, okay? And it is something that I have to exert effort for, whereas I have to exert zero effort to experience life as a male. I just open my eyes and ears and whatever, and boom, male-centric. Okay, and that's what I mean. And it's that basic. And if, as a man, you don't recognize that, it's going to get in the way of you connecting with your teenage daughter, or obviously other women, adult women that you're trying to date or connect with. It will also obviously prevent you from understanding the Barbie movie and appreciating it. Okay, so there's a lot more I wanted to cover, but whoa, I'm like doubly over the time that I had allotted for this. Hopefully this helps you in some way. If it has, please share it with anyone else that you think would benefit from it. In this episode, I covered my story of pain and heartache and bitterness and anger and my sort of Ken story arc up to this point in my life, and then how I found all of that anger empty. And then I recognized that there's a small minority of people that would match with me in terms of integrity or whatever, or what I was looking for. And then I just widened the net considerably to find this person, but I also wasn't in a rush. I also wasn't too sanguine. I wasn't optimistic about finding such a person because it was supposed to be rare. And I purposely made it rare because I could always just drop my standards and settle. And I refused to do so. So that's part of the bargain. And I also wanted to point out, as doing a kind of ode to Ken, how Ken is awesome. Ken is definitely enough. And then I also wanted to make the point of intellectual humility that's really coming home to me, that, and I can understand why sometimes I have parts that do a lot of the speaking that might come off as arrogant or demeaning. But that it's all, these lessons are coming out of my own personal experience, unless I say so otherwise. And the humility to recognize that there's a whole segment of male population that I can't understand from the inside, but I try to understand it as much as I can from the outside. And I'm acknowledging that as a limitation for reaching certain segments of males. So that's the recap. If this helped you in any way, please share it with anyone else that you think could benefit from it. Leave a comment. As you can see, I'm really feeding off of your feedback. I'd love to hear what you think about this episode. Thank you so much for listening. I look forward to welcoming you to the next episode. David Tian, signing out.